There are two kinds of phone calls that change your life. The kind you're expecting, and the kind that finds you on a Thursday morning when you're still in your pajamas eating leftover pizza for breakfast. This was the second kind. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge, where every secret has a price, every betrayal has a consequence, and justice always finds its way home. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and drop a comment below. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because in this family, you never want to miss what happens next. 18 months. That's how long it had been since I buried my wife. 18 months since I stood in the rain at Riverside Memorial, holding Sienna's hand so tight, she had to whisper for me to ease up. 18 months since I watched them lower Naomi Ann Ashford into the ground, and felt something inside me go quiet in a way I wasn't sure would ever get loud again. I was managing. That's the word people use when they mean surviving, but not really living. I was managing. I had gotten pretty good at the small things, making coffee for one, sleeping on my side of the bed, not reaching for my phone to call her when something funny happened on TV. Those little habits that grief slowly sands down until they stop bleeding every single time. And then Harlan Briggs called. Harlan had been my attorney for 17 years. Good man. Steady. The kind of guy who communicates entirely in facts and never wastes a syllable. So when he called that Thursday morning, I answered with my mouth still full of cold pizza, fully expecting something boring about a contract renewal or a quarterly filing. Instead, what I heard made me set the pizza down. Harlan's voice came through carefully and measured the way doctors talk when they're about to say something they've rehearsed. John, I need you to come to my office today. Not tomorrow. Today. I told him I could probably swing by around 3. He said, make it 10. Now Harlan Briggs had never in 17 years told me to make it anything. I sat up straight. I asked him what was going on. He paused, and Harlan Briggs did not pause. And then he said the part that lodged itself in my chest like a splinter I'm still trying to remove, to this day. Sienna came to see me yesterday evening. She brought something with her. John, it's a video from Naomi. I remember the room getting very still. I asked him to repeat himself. He did, and then he said, come alone, John, and please, whatever you do, don't mention any of this to Sienna. I'd like to tell you I drove to Harlan's office, calmly, that I turned on the radio, obeyed traffic laws, maybe stopped for a decent cup of coffee like a reasonable adult. What I actually did was put on 2 different shoes, drive 4 blocks in the wrong direction, and nearly rear-end a FedEx truck because I was trying to remember the last time Kathy had been anywhere near a camera. A video. From Naomi. My brain kept turning it over like a coin it couldn't identify. Kathy hated being filmed. Our wedding video exists only because her mother threatened to stop speaking to her. Every birthday, every Christmas, every vacation, she was always the one behind the camera, never in front of it. The woman had once deleted a photo I took of her because, and I quote, John, I look like I'm being interrogated, so what on earth had made her sit down in front of a camera and record something serious enough that my attorney was calling me with the energy of a man defusing a bomb? And why couldn't Sienna know? That part was eating me alive. Sienna was our daughter, 26 years old, sharp as a tack, and the spitting image of her mother, in a way that still occasionally stopped me cold in the middle of a conversation. She and Kathy had been close in that particular way that mothers and daughters are close, where they could argue about absolutely nothing for 45 minutes, and then call each other an hour later laughing about it. Why would Kathy leave a message that Sienna wasn't supposed to hear about? I parked crooked outside Harlan's building, and didn't fix it. Harlan met me at the door himself. That was the first sign something was different. In 17 years, the man had never once met me at the door. He shook my hand, looked me over the way people look at you when they're deciding how much you can handle, and then he walked me back to his office without saying a single word. The envelope was on his desk, a regular flash drive in a small clear case, sitting inside a manila envelope with my name written on the front in handwriting I recognized before I even sat down. Kathy's handwriting. I stared at it. Harlan sat across from me, folded his hands, and said Sienna found this about a week ago. She said it was tucked inside a book on Naomi's shelf. The book had been there since before she passed. Sienna had been slowly going through her mother's things, and when she pulled the book out, the envelope fell from between the pages. I asked why Sienna brought it to Harlan instead of bringing it to me. Harlan said, because Naomi's instructions on the outside of the envelope said to. I turned the envelope over. There it was, in Kathy's handwriting, in blue ink, underlined twice the way she underlined things when she meant business, for John. To be given to him by Harlan Briggs, alone. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I asked Harlan how long ago Kathy had set this up with him. He said, she came to see me about 3 months before she passed. She told me she had prepared something for you and that if it was ever found, I should make sure you received it privately. I didn't know what was on it, John. I still don't. She asked me to give you the room. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the door. Then he stopped and turned around. John, whatever is on there, just know that woman loved you in a way that was almost inconvenient to witness from the outside. He closed the door behind him. I sat alone in Harlan Briggs's office for probably 2 full minutes without touching anything. Just me, a flash drive, and the particular silence that only exists when your life is about to be divided into before and after. I opened Harlan's laptop. I plugged in the drive, and then Kathy's face filled the screen. She looked healthy. She looked calm. She was sitting at the desk in our old home office, wearing the gray cardigan she always wore when she was being serious about something. And she was looking directly into the camera, with those steady brown eyes that had always made me feel like she could see 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. She said, "Hi, John. I need you to sit all the way back in that chair because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you want to stand up." I sat all the way back in the chair. She took one breath and said, "Gordon Hale has been trying to have me killed. And John, he doesn't know yet that he failed. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you. Genuinely." I didn't move. I want you to understand that. I am a man who has prided himself for most of his adult life on being a reactor. Something goes wrong. I respond. Pipe bursts. I grab a wrench. Stock drops. I make a call. I don't freeze. But I sat in that chair like someone had poured concrete into my spine. Gordon Hale. My business partner of 11 years. The man who had delivered a eulogy at Kathy's funeral so moving that 3 people told me afterward it was the most beautiful thing they'd ever heard. The man who had shown up at my house every Sunday for the first 2 months after she died, with food I didn't ask for and company I didn't want, but probably needed. I need to stop here and tell you about those Sundays, because they matter more than I understood at the time. Gordon never called ahead. He would simply appear at my door around noon, arms full. Sometimes a full pot of chili he'd made that morning. Sometimes a bag from the barbecue place on Clemens Street that Kathy and I used to go to on anniversaries. And I always wondered how he knew about that place. But grief makes you accept things without questioning them. He would come in, put the food on the counter, and sit with me in the living room for 2 or 3 hours. He never pushed me to talk. He never offered advice I didn't ask for. He just sat there, present, steady, patient, the way a genuinely good man sits with someone who is drowning. There was one Sunday in particular, about 6 weeks after the funeral. I had not eaten a real meal in 4 days. I didn't know that until Gordon arrived and looked at me and said very quietly, "John, when did you last eat something that wasn't from a vending machine?" He went to my kitchen and made eggs and toast, and sat across from me at the table and watched me eat with the quiet attention of a man who genuinely cared whether I finished my plate. I had thought about that Sunday many times in the 18 months since. Sitting in Harlan's office with Kathy's face on the screen, I thought about it differently. He had been managing me every Sunday, every pot of chili, every careful, unhurried hour on my couch. He had been tending to the grief he had engineered and making absolutely certain it was developing correctly. On the screen, Kathy wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly, the way she always did when she wanted to make sure you were receiving every single word. And she said, "I know how this sounds. I know you're sitting there right now doing that thing where your jaw goes tight and you start defending him in your head before I even finish. Stop it. Just listen to me." 18 months gone, and she still knew exactly what I was doing. I unclenched my jaw. She told me it started about 8 months before she died. She had been helping Gordon organize some financial documents for a company audit. Nothing unusual. She'd done it before. She had a background in accounting, and she enjoyed the occasional project to keep her mind sharp. Gordon had always trusted her with the books, until she found the accounts. She said, "At first I thought it was a clerical error. You know me, John. I don't jump to conclusions. So I checked it again, and then I checked it a third time, and then I pulled 3 years of statements and sat at that desk, right where you're sitting now, for an entire weekend while you were visiting your sister. I remembered that weekend she had told me she was doing a deep clean of the house. I had come home to spotless baseboards and a wife who seemed unusually quiet. Not cleaning, investigating. She had found, buried underneath layers of shell companies and dummy invoices, a systematic laundering operation running directly through the firm. Money coming in dirty, cycling through our legitimate accounts, coming out clean. Millions of dollars, over years, hidden with just enough sophistication that a casual glance wouldn't catch it, but not quite sophisticated enough to survive Kathy Ashford with a spreadsheet and a bad feeling. On the screen, she almost smiled when she said, "He always underestimated me. You never did. That's one of the things I loved most about you. Just for a minute, just to be a human being for 60 seconds before going back to being a man whose world was being reconstructed from scratch." When I pressed play again, her face returned, and the smile was gone. She said, "I made a mistake, John. I panicked. Instead of coming to you first, and I am so sorry I didn't come to you first, I confronted Gordon. I closed my eyes. She said, I know. Don't make that face." She had gone to Gordon's office on a Wednesday afternoon in March, laid the documents in front of him, and told him quietly and directly that she knew what he was doing and that he had one opportunity to come clean before she went to the authorities. She said Gordon had gone very still in the way that certain men go still when they're not scared, when they're calculating. He had looked at the documents. He had looked at her, and then he smiled and said, "Kathy, you have always been the smartest person in any room. Let me make some calls and we'll figure out how to handle this the right way." She left his office thinking she had done the right thing. 3 days later, someone cut her brake line. The room tilted. That's the only way I can describe it. Harlan's entire office tilted about 15 degrees, and I had to grip the edge of the desk to remind myself I was sitting in a chair and not standing on the edge of something. Kathy's death had been ruled an accident. Wet roads, a curve she'd driven 100 times, a guardrail that didn't hold. The investigation had lasted exactly 9 days before they closed the file. I had asked no questions, because grief had hollowed me out completely, and because there was absolutely no reason in the world to ask questions. Gordon Hale had been the one who drove me to the police station the day they told me it was an accident. He had put his hand on my shoulder in the parking lot and said, "At least you have answers now, brother." Brother. On the screen, Kathy said, "I survived, John." And the room tilted again, in the opposite direction. She said, "The crash should have killed me. The doctor said the impact alone should have killed me." But I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in a city I'm not going to name on this recording, and there was a woman sitting next to my bed who worked for a federal task force that had been investigating Gordon Hale for 2 years. She paused. She told me that if I went home, he would finish what he started. She told me that the only way to build an airtight case against him was if he believed he had succeeded. So I let you believe it too. And John, there is not a single day that has passed where that decision hasn't cost me more than I can describe. I was standing up. I don't remember deciding to stand. My body just made the call without consulting me. Kathy said, "Sit back down, honey." I sat back down. She said, "By the time you're watching this, one of two things is true. Either the case is close to finished and I'm about to come home, or something went wrong and this video is the only thing I was able to leave you. Either way, there's something you need to do immediately." She leaned forward until her face nearly filled the screen. "Go to the third shelf in the garage, behind the red toolbox. There's a gray lockbox. The combination is Sienna's birthday. Inside that box is everything I copied before I disappeared. Every document, every account number, every transaction. It's enough, John. It's more than enough." She paused, and for the first time in the entire video, her voice changed. The composure cracked, just slightly, just at the edges the way old paint cracks before it finally lets go. She said, "I have thought about you every single day. I have thought about Sienna every single day. I have imagined you both moving through that house without me, and it has been the most painful thing I have ever endured in my life. But here is what I need you to hold on to, John Ashford. I did not leave you. I was protecting you. There is a difference between those two things, and I need you to know that difference down to your bones." She reached toward the camera. The screen went black. I sat in Harlan Briggs's office for a very long time after that. When Harlan finally knocked and opened the door, he took one look at my face and walked directly to the small cabinet in the corner of his office, where he kept a bottle of bourbon for what I could only assume were exactly these kinds of situations.
Yeah.
He poured 2 glasses without
Just
asking.
enough to
He
get
sat down
through.
across from me. I looked at him and said the only
That's what
words I
being
could
jealous
locate
is.
inside the wreckage of the last 40 minutes. She's alive, Harlan. He didn't
Mention
say
jealous,
anything.
man.
He just pushed the glass
Doesn't mean
closer
you're
to
real
me.
hungry.
I picked it up. My hand was shaking. Not because I was scared, because for the first time in 18 months, I wasn't managing anymore. I was feeling, and buried underneath the shock and the rage and the grief that was suddenly being rewritten in real time, buried under all of it was something I hadn't felt since I stood in the rain at Riverside Memorial, holding my daughter's hand too tight. Hope. But hope, I was about to learn, is never simple. Because somewhere between Harlan's parking lot and my front door, my phone buzzed with a text message from Sienna. 4 words. Dad, we need to talk. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. Here's what nobody tells you about hope. It doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't knock. It kicks the door clean off the hinges, walks into the middle of your life, and then has the audacity to hand you a brand new set of problems you weren't even remotely prepared for. That's exactly what happened on the drive home from Harlan's office. 4 words. Dad, we need to talk. I stared at that text message at a red light for so long that the car behind me had to honk twice before I remembered I was operating heavy machinery. I typed back the most non-committal response a father has ever constructed in the history of parenting. Sure, honey. Later today? She replied in under 10 seconds. I'm already at your house. Of course she was. I want to pause here and tell you something about Sienna Ashford that you need to understand going into this next part. My daughter is brilliant in the specific and slightly exhausting way that people are brilliant when they get it from both parents. She has Kathy's instincts and my stubbornness, which is genuinely a dangerous combination. She can read a room the way other people read large print books, effortlessly and faster than seems fair, which meant that walking into my own house with the weight of what I now knew sitting on my face like a neon sign was going to require acting skills I did not possess. I pulled into the driveway, sat in the car for a moment, gave myself a small, private pep talk that I will not repeat here because it was embarrassing. Then I walked inside. Sienna was in the kitchen. She had made coffee. She always made coffee when she was nervous. It was her version of having something to do with her hands. And she was standing at the counter with her arms crossed and an expression on her face that I recognized immediately because her mother had worn that exact expression every single time she knew something I didn't. She looked at me and said, "You went to see Harlan." Not a question, a statement. I told her Harlan had called me about some paperwork. She said, "Dad," just my name. 1 word. Deployed with the full force of everything she inherited from her mother, I poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't need and leaned against the counter across from her and said, "Okay, talk." And then she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me that you're going to stay calm." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because in the last 3 hours I had discovered my dead wife was alive, that my business partner had tried to have her killed, and that my entire life for the past 18 months had been a performance staged for the benefit of a criminal investigation. Staying calm was now practically my superpower. I told her to go ahead. She took a breath and said, "I found Mom's video 3 weeks ago, not 1 week ago." I went still. She said, "I watched it, Dad. I watched the whole thing." And I understood completely why Kathy had written alone on that envelope, and underlined it twice. Watching my daughter's face at that moment, I could see the full geography of what she had been carrying for 3 weeks by herself. The shock, the relief, the grief that suddenly had to be reclassified and reorganized, the rage, the confusion, the desperate white-knuckled effort of a 26-year-old woman trying to protect her father from an earthquake while standing in the middle of it herself. She had carried all of that, for 3 weeks, alone. I set my coffee down and I said, "Sienna." She held up one hand and said, "I'm not finished." I closed my mouth. She said, "After I watched it, I didn't know what to do. So I did what Mom said, and I went to the garage. I found the lockbox. I opened it. I asked her what she did with what was inside. She looked me dead in the eye and said, 'I made copies.' And then I reached out to someone. Everything in me went cold. I asked her, very carefully, very slowly, who she had reached out to. She walked to the kitchen table, picked up her phone, and turned the screen to face me. There was an email chain, professional header, federal insignia at the top, the task force. She had found the federal task force that had been working Kathy's case. I sat down at the kitchen table because my legs made a unanimous decision that standing was no longer on the agenda. Sienna sat across from me and said, "They've been building the case for 2 years, Dad. They're close. But they needed the documents Mom copied, and they needed someone inside, someone Gordon trusted, to make one final move." I looked at her. She said, "They need you." I said, "Absolutely not." She said, "Dad." I said, "Sienna, I am not under any circumstances." She slid a piece of paper across the table. I looked down at it. It was a photograph, printed from surveillance footage, grainy, time-stamped, taken from across the street. A woman coming out of a coffee shop, wearing a dark coat, hair shorter than I remembered, carrying a cup with both hands the exact way she always did, because she insisted on warming her palms even in summer. I stopped breathing. She said quietly, "They sent me that last week, as confirmation." I picked up the photograph with both hands. Kathy, 18 months older, a little thinner, hair cut close to her jaw, but unmistakably, impossibly, beautifully Kathy. Standing on a sidewalk somewhere, alive and uncaptured and walking out of a coffee shop like a woman who still had somewhere to be. I don't know how long I held that photograph. Long enough that Sienna got up quietly and refilled both our coffees without saying a word, which told me she had been saving that particular kindness specifically for this moment. When I could speak again, I asked what they needed me to do. Sienna sat back down and said, "Gordon has been getting nervous. The task force thinks he suspects the case is closing in. They need someone he trusts completely to meet with him, keep him comfortable, and wear a wire during one specific conversation where they believe he'll confirm the order he put out." I asked if they understood that Gordon Hale was not a stupid man. She said, "They know. That's exactly why it has to be you. You're the grieving widower, Dad. You're the one person on earth he has absolutely no reason to be suspicious of." The grieving widower. Weaponized. I almost smiled despite myself, because somewhere in a city she wouldn't name on a recording, I had a feeling Kathy had smiled at exactly that same irony. I asked Sienna if she understood what the task force had told her about the stakes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They told me that if this doesn't work, if Gordon doesn't confirm on record, the entire case collapses. Everything Mom found, everything she preserved, everything she sacrificed 18 months of her life for, it becomes inadmissible. He walks. And the moment he walks, he becomes the most dangerous version of himself, because he knows someone was building a case, and he needs to make sure it can never be rebuilt." She looked at me steadily. "They said without you, Mom spent 18 months in hiding for nothing." I asked Sienna if she was scared. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I've been scared for 3 weeks. I'm kind of getting used to it." She sounded so much like her mother when she said it that I had to look out the window for a moment. 3 days later, I called Gordon Hale for the first time in months. I told him I was struggling. The anniversary of Kathy's passing was approaching, and I was having a hard time, and I needed to talk to someone who had known her. I told him I felt guilty about how the business had been running, that I wanted to have dinner and reconnect. There was a pause on his end, and then Gordon said, warm as a fireplace, smooth as a man who had been lying for so long he'd forgotten it was a skill and not just a personality. "John, of course, I've been worried about you. Name the place. I want to tell you what it felt like to sit across from Gordon Hale that evening. I want to tell you because it was the most difficult thing I have ever done in my life. More difficult than the funeral. More difficult than the 18 months that followed it. More difficult than sitting in Harlan's office watching Kathy's face fill a screen and hearing her tell me she was alive. All of those things happened to me. This, I had to do. I got there first. Same instinct as always. Back to the wall, facing the door. 2 minutes early. The restaurant was warm and quiet. Dark wood, amber lighting, the kind of place where the noise of the world stays respectfully outside. I sat down. I touched the small device in my breast pocket once, just once, to confirm it was there. Then I put my hand flat on the table and I made a decision. For the next however long this took, I was not John Ashford whose wife was alive in a city she wouldn't name on a recording. I was not John Ashford who had spent the last 3 days understanding with complete and sickening clarity what those Sunday visits actually were. I was the man Gordon Hale believed he was meeting, the grieving widower. struggling with the anniversary, guilty about the business, reaching out to his oldest friend because he didn't know where else to turn. I arranged my face accordingly. Gordon walked in at 7 on the dot. He looked the same. That was the thing that kept hitting me throughout the evening. He looked exactly the same. Same easy stride, same genuine seeming warmth when he saw me across the room. Same way of making you feel when he turned his attention fully on you, that you were the most important person in whatever space you both occupied. He crossed the room and put both hands on my shoulders and looked at me with what appeared to be real concern. "John, you look tired." "I am tired," I said. We sat down, we ordered. He asked about Sienna with what sounded exactly like affection. He told me about a fishing trip he'd taken the month before, laughing about the one that got away. He refilled my water glass when it got low. He was, for the first 40 minutes of that dinner, the most convincing version of a good man I have ever sat across from. And I matched him, story for story, laugh for laugh. I let him guide the conversation where he wanted to guide it, toward the business, toward the future, toward the comfortable narrative of two old partners finding their way forward. I watched his eyes the whole time, not obviously. The way you watch something you have learned to read without appearing to read it. He was relaxed. He was comfortable. He believed completely that he was sitting across from a man who had no idea. At 41 minutes, he leaned forward slightly and said, "I've been thinking about restructuring the partnership. With you taking a reduced role given everything you've been through, I think it would be better for both of us." I said, "Majority control shifting to my side. You'd still have equity. You'd still draw income. But the day-to-day, the decisions, the accounts, that comes to me." I looked at him. "The accounts," I said. "Yes, all of them?" Something shifted behind his eyes, very slightly, but I saw it. He said, "It's the cleanest structure, given the circumstances." I said, "Gordon, can I ask you something directly?" He said, "Always." I said, "Did Kathy ever talk to you about the accounts before she died?" The table went completely still. Every muscle in Gordon Hale's face stayed exactly where it was. The warmth did not drain. The concern did not disappear. The performance was, even now, technically extraordinary. But his hands which had been loose and relaxed on the table, flattened, just slightly, just enough. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "She mentioned to me once, a few weeks before the accident, that she'd been helping you with some audit preparation. She said something felt off to her. I've always wondered if I should have." The silence lasted 4 full seconds. In those 4 seconds, I watched Gordon Hale make a calculation. I had watched him make calculations before across tables like this. Gordon was a calculator. It was one of the things that had made him an extraordinary partner. And I knew what the process looked like from the outside. The slight unfocusing of the eyes. The almost imperceptible pause in breathing. The moment of stillness before the decision. He said, "Kathy was meticulous. Whatever she thought she found, I'm sure it was just a filing inconsistency. You know how she was with numbers." "I do," I said. "She was never wrong about numbers." Another pause. Shorter this time. He said, "John, what is this really about?" I looked at him across that table, at the man who had sat on my couch for 18 months, with carefully chosen food and carefully maintained grief management. At the man who had driven me to the police station and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "At least you have answers now, brother." I said, "I've just been going over old ground, the way you do when an anniversary gets close, trying to make sure I didn't miss anything." He held my gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then the warmth came back. "You didn't miss anything," he said. "It was an accident, John. A terrible accident. And I need you to stop torturing yourself with questions that don't have better answers." He reached across the table and squeezed my arm. "She's gone," he said. "And I miss her too. Every day." I looked at his hand on my arm. I thought about Kathy sitting in our home office for an entire weekend, with 3 years of financial statements. I thought about a woman in a city she wouldn't name on a recording, sitting next to a hospital bed telling my wife that going home would get her killed. I thought about 18 months of Sundays. I said, "You're right. I'm sorry, I don't know why I brought it up." He smiled. "Don't apologize," he said. "That's what I'm here for." He meant it completely. I could hear it. Even now, even in this, he meant it as the performance of a genuine friend. And that, more than anything else that happened at that table, was the thing I could not find a place for inside myself. We finished dinner. He recommended the dessert. I said it was extraordinary. Outside on the sidewalk, he hugged me, one of those full two-armed hugs that feel like home, and told me to call him any time. I watched him walk to his car. I stood on that sidewalk for exactly as long as it took him to reach the parking lot. And then I heard the voices behind me. Mr. Ashford. I turned around. 2 agents. Badges out. The woman closest to me, mid-40s, dark coat, the specific calm of someone who has done this many times, said quietly, he confirmed, we have everything we need. Are you all right? I thought about that for a moment. No, I said honestly, but I will be. She nodded. We'll take it from here. I turned back toward the parking lot. Gordon Hale was 20 feet from his car. When they reached him, I watched him stop walking. I watched him turn. I watched the calculation happen one final time on his face, and then I watched it stop, the way a machine stops when the power is cut. Not gradually. All at once. He looked back across the parking lot and found me standing on the sidewalk. And for one moment, one single unguarded, unperformed, completely honest moment, I saw on Gordon Hale's face what had always been underneath the warmth and the sundaes and the carefully chosen food. Not remorse. Recognition. The recognition of a man who had always known, somewhere underneath everything, that this moment was the only way this could have ended. Then they were walking him toward a car, and he was not looking at me anymore. And I was looking at my shoes on a sidewalk outside a restaurant, where a man who tried to kill my wife had just put his hand on my arm and told me she was gone. I stood there for a while, just breathing. Gordon Hale was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering across state lines, and obstruction of federal investigation. His associate, the man who had interfered with Kathy's brake line, had been under surveillance by the task force for 8 months before the arrest. He cooperated within 48 hours. The case, when it finally came to trial, lasted 11 days. The verdict took the jury 4 hours. I'll tell you about the phone call. I was sitting at my kitchen table when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, and the voice on the other end said, quieter than I remembered, slightly rougher, with a small catch in it that told me she had been rehearsing this moment for a very long time. Hi, John. I've been asked a lot of times since then what I said back. People want it to be something cinematic, something quotable. The truth is, I said the most ordinary thing in the world. I said, I made coffee this morning for 1 cup and it still came out too strong. I've never been able to get the ratio right without you. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a relieved laugh. Her real laugh. The one that starts somewhere in her chest and takes a second to reach her face. The one I had been quietly starving for, without fully admitting it, for 18 months. She laughed and said, I'll be home in 4 days. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories on Sweet Family Revenge. And as always, thank you, genuinely, for being part of this family.